Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuot. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. 2 Palestinians attack passengers at a Jerusalem bus stop during the morning rush hour, killing at least 3 people. Somalia business owners say imported Chinese products are rapidly displacing their locally manufactured goods. And mourners paid their final respects to former U.S. First Lady Rosalynn Carter. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in Israel Thursday, where Israeli police say 2 Palestinians attacked passengers at a Jerusalem bus stop during the morning rush hour, killing at least 3 people and wounding 8 others. The assailants arrived at the scene by car in the morning, armed with an M16 rifle and a handgun, and police say they began shooting at civilians before subsequently being killed at the scene. The shooters came from East Jerusalem and was stopped by off-duty soldiers and another civilian who was nearby, according to police. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in Israel on Thursday, reminding Israeli leaders of the need for Israel to abide by international law in its war against Hamas in Gaza. The State Department says Blinken told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the U.S. will continue to support for Israel's right to protect itself from terrorist violence. The 2 men talked just hours after Israel and Hamas agreed to, at the last minute, to a 3rd extension of their ceasefire agreement. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Russia's defense ministry released video Wednesday. It says shows Russian fighter jets and artillery firing at Ukrainian targets. Russian forces have ramped up attacks on eastern Ukraine as the winter approaches. In Brussels, at a NATO foreign ministers meeting, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken acknowledged that some have questioned whether the U.S. and other NATO allies should continue to stand with Ukraine almost 2 years after Russia's full-scale invasion.
But the answer here today at NATO is clear and it's unwavering. We must and we will continue to support Ukraine.
Blinken sought to reassure allies concerned that some Republican lawmakers in the U.S. Congress are reluctant to keep funding robust military aid for Ukraine. He said Speaker of the House Mike Johnson had spoken about the need to fund Kyiv recently, which Blinken called encouraging. One analyst told VOA additional funding for Ukraine is not in Blinken's hands.
There's not a great deal that Secretary Blinken from the executive branch can do about that. It's really in the hands of the legislature, a co-equal branch of government, and the Republican Party is sort of ironing out its differences, or not ironing out its differences as we speak.
Kimmage told VOA that Blinken is sending a strong message by attending meetings of NATO and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, during the Israel-Hamas war.
And there is a kind of allegation out there, or a claim out there, that the U.S. has now shifted attention to the Middle East and is doing less to engage with Europe. I think that Secretary Blinken, in going both to the NATO and the OSCE meetings, is very firmly trying to signal that the U.S. remains focused on Europe.
Blinken returns to the Middle East for talks Thursday and Friday, the 3rd time since the militant group Hamas triggered the war with its October 7th attack on Israel. Blinken said he would work to prolong the truce so more Israeli hostages can be released and more humanitarian aid can be delivered to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who desperately need it. Blinken plans to visit Israel, Ramallah in the West Bank, and the United Arab Emirates. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Secretary Blinken also met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah Thursday. The truce has led some humanitarian aid into Gaza after much of the coastal territory of 2.3 million people was reduced to rubble by 7 weeks of Israeli bombardment. Now for more on the Israel-Hamas war, I'm joined live from Tel Aviv, Israel, by Lady Rosalynn. Ricky, what is the latest development regarding this extended ceasefire?
Well, we're waiting to see if the same scenario that occurred last night will occur also this evening. The hostages last night were only released around midnight, and the Palestinian prisoners were released after that. And the final agreement to the list of hostages that Hamas had given this list to the Israelis to approve was not approved until close to 7 in the morning, when, if it was not approved, the war would be restarted. So we're hoping that the list will be approved, the hostages will be released, and the ceasefire will continue.
You know, Ricky, as we just mentioned about this tragedy of the 3 Israelis that were killed this morning and 8 wounded, how are Israelis reacting to that attack?
They are seeing the attack as a clear signal from Hamas that even when there is a ceasefire in Gaza, they will not cease their attacks in the rest of Israel. This was not even in the West Bank or East Jerusalem. It was in the center of Jerusalem. And they say that the 2 gunmen were affiliated with Hamas and that the attack was in revenge for other Hamas gunmen who were killed by Israeli troops in Jenin yesterday.
Now, we just mentioned about Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. What more are you learning about that meeting?
Well, Secretary of State Blinken has reiterated to Netanyahu that they want the ceasefire to continue, both in order to allow more hostage releases and more humanitarian aid. And if and when the war is resumed, they're trying to encourage Netanyahu to be more careful, aware of civilian casualties in Gaza. Netanyahu has assured Blinken that the war will in fact resume. And Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure from the hardline members of his coalition, who said that if the war is stopped, they will bring down the government. And this is something that Netanyahu can't afford. Tomorrow, actually, his trial on corruption charges begins again after a break because of the war.
Wow. Ricky, many thanks for your reporting and updating us on what's happening there in Israel. Lady Rosalynn reporting live for us from Tel Aviv, Israel. The Hamas massacre of Israelis on October 7th has persuaded tens of thousands of Israeli civilians to get personal guns for the first time, and some groups are voicing concerns about the implications. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
Leila Gradsky said she had thought of getting a gun for a while, but what pushed her to finally get one was the events of October 7th, the day Hamas gunmen rampaged through more than 20 Israeli communities and slaughtered 1,200 men, women, and children.
The stories coming out of down south were unbelievable, and the kind of silver lining to it was that the communities did have guns in the homes that were equipped, were able to protect themselves, and it could have been a lot worse if we not been able to.
She came to Caliber 3, a counter-terror and defense training school, to buy a gun and learn how to use it. She bought a Mossberg MC2C for about $1,300 and paid another $150 for the training course. Her first efforts at shooting were not successful, but she quickly improved. Yaakov Tueti moved to Israel from France and lives in a Jerusalem neighborhood on the border of West Bank Palestinian towns. He says he applied for a gun license just 1 week after the October 7th Hamas attack because he wants to protect his wife and 2 young children at home.
When we saw what happened on October 7th, We decided that next time we need to be stronger and more prepared for any scenario. I always thought about getting a gun.
לעשות את זה, אני גר בירושלים ואנחנו חיים את זה, אבל אחרי מה שקרה אז עוד יותר.
Gun sales and training at Caliber 3 are up 2,000% since the Hamas attack, says company founder Sharon Gatt. He says the procedure for granting civilian gun licenses is strict.
They apply for the license. Then the Ministry of Interior Affairs here in Israel does a background check on them to check they're not criminals, they're not terrorists, they're not psychopaths. Mentally and physically they're fit to carry a weapon. And if that's okay, then they do an interview with these people. They send them to Caliber 3 so we can check them, train them.
Israel's hardline National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir recently eased the conditions for Israeli civilians to get guns and announced the formation of additional civilian rapid response security teams. Some 250,000 Israelis have applied for licenses, and only 4 have been refused, according to the Haaretz newspaper. Women's groups worry that the proliferation of guns could lead to their abuse in cases of domestic violence. Ben-Gvir's campaign to arm civilian security teams is separate from his efforts to increase the arming of Jewish settlers in the West Bank. Since October 7th, Jewish settlers have killed at least 9 Palestinians, according to the UN and human rights groups. But even Israelis who don't live in the West Bank settlements or next to the Gaza border say they're concerned about their personal safety.
I wouldn't say it made me feel powerful, more of it gives me a sense of added protection. Like, I know our army and security forces are amazing, but they can't be there in a split second. And so definitely being able to have that measure of control is important.
The events of October 7th have traumatized many Israelis, even if they were not personally affected. And they say they will do whatever they can to make sure it doesn't happen again. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
In Somalia's bustling local markets of Mogadishu, local business owners say imported Chinese products are rapidly displacing their own manufactured goods. Abdulkadir Zubair spoke to several business owners and has this report narrated by VOA's Carol Van Dam.
4 years ago, Abukar Sheikh Abu's shop used to be full, producing at least 20 pairs of shoes daily. But nowadays, he says, the market has changed, with Chinese-made products challenging local businessmen like him.
These shoes had a market before Chinese-made products flooded the country, costing $2 to $3. We make high-quality shoes. They are soft and comfortable, especially for people suffering from burning feet, sign of nerve damage. Our market used to thrive, and we used to ship our products to Hargeisa, Djibouti, and South Africa. However, nowadays, Chinese-made products pose a challenge.
While Abu now produces only a few pairs daily, his main distribution is from customer orders of clients who appreciate his products, like Sufi Mohammed Amin.
I prefer these pairs of shoes because they are made of leather and provide comfort, unlike Chinese-made shoes.
China does not only import shoes into Somalia, it also offers other products, from clothing to utensils. Some customers like Ahmed Mohammed Hassan say they prefer products from countries other than China.
These clothes are not made in China. They are of high quality, and I frequently purchase clothes from this store during every festival. They import the clothes from the US, and they cost around $30 in contrast to Chinese-made products, which cost $4 to $5.
Fartun Qasim Ali purchases utensils from a local market in Mogadishu.
We come here to buy utensils for gatherings. Locally made utensils have limited variety, but those from abroad offer a wide selection, from jugs to plates.
Buying imported goods poses a challenge to locally made products, business owners say. Saeed Ali Maulid, a shopkeeper in the city, says it's disheartening to see people choose imported goods over local products.
Many people prefer imported goods over locally made products. And that is discouraging if you ask the person why they prefer imported goods. They might respond in a demeaning manner, saying this is a Somali-made thing.
Meanwhile, in the capital, small business owners like Abu say Chinese imports also affect the employment of skilled young people who used to craft local shoes.
We used to create employment opportunities by making these shoes. For instance, sewing cost $1, and the craftsmanship and other labor for a pair of 2 shoes cost $10. We used to sell each pair for $25 to $30.
Somali business owners say they find themselves in a precarious situation due to Chinese imports pushing them or their products out of markets. For Abdul Qadir Subair in Mogadishu, Somalia, I'm Carol Van Dam.
Here in Washington, the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee's Subcommittee on Africa is holding a hearing today on Ethiopia promise or perils of the U.S. policy. 2 career diplomats are testifying. For more on the hearing, I'm joined live from Capitol Hill by VOA's Carol Van Dam. Hello, Carol. What are you learning so far from this hearing?
Hi, Esther. Well, we heard, of course, from the chairman, John James, and in his opening remarks, he said that he's very concerned about the status of Ethiopia's cessation of hostilities agreement, adding that the greater conflict has clouded Ethiopia's future. He said the deal was signed a little over a year ago, but experts with an international commission on human rights say atrocities continue on a large scale, especially in the Amhara region and Tigray. He said the situation raised questions about Ethiopia's long-term stability and said the Ethiopian government has increasingly engaged in a rapid arms race and is more concerned, he said, about defaulting on its international debt. James said American taxpayers are tired of being used by the Ethiopian government. And then Mike Hammer, the special U.S. envoy to the Horn of Africa, who testified, said the U.S. is deeply concerned about gross violations in the country. He admitted that violations continue, especially in Amhara and the Oromia region. And he said, rest assured, we are clear-eyed about what's at stake in Ethiopia's future. Africa's second most populous country, and he said the U.S. is committed to a peaceful and prosperous Ethiopia. And it too, is not satisfied with the ongoing rights abuses.
So, Carol, we know that we have perhaps the largest Ethiopian diaspora in this Washington, D.C. area. What are you hearing from them, from those of them attending this hearing today?
Yeah, I actually spoke to Burhan Meskel. He's a former Ethiopian diplomat who is here and an international lawyer who said that he too wants to hear from these career diplomats what they had to say about the ongoing fighting in Ethiopia despite the cessation of hostilities agreement that happened earlier this month. He even told me, and this we have not verified, but he said that there have been drones that have been striking places in Amhara. And I said, well, who's sending these drones? And he said the government.
Carol, what's really being emphasized by the 2 career diplomats in this discussion?
Well, Mike Hammer said that human rights is a core priority with the U.S. government of what's happening in Ethiopia. He said that conversations with the government will continue. He noted that he was just there in Addis Ababa last week and had conversations with high-level government officials. And he addressed those issues that the U.S. government has of accountability and credibility.
Right, Carol, thank you so much for your reporting. VOA's Carol Van Dam reporting live for us from Capitol Hill. Now, still to come, mourners pay final tribute to former U.S. First Lady Rosalynn Carter. We'll be right back.
Sextortion is the abuse of power to obtain a sexual benefit, according to a study done by Harvard University. It can manifest itself in various forms, including demanding sex in exchange for grades. This unsavory practice is used against female students in Nigeria, Botswana, Tanzania, and it's been used to exploit women seeking employment in South Africa. This week on Our Voices, we are discussing the sextortion of women in Africa. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching Africa 54 from the Voice of America, from America's capital, Washington, D.C. In other news, Ethiopia's central bank chief has announced that the cash-strapped nation has secured a $1.5 billion debt relief agreement with its creditors. The move is expected to ease Ethiopia's financial burden as it seeks a wider funding program. A court hearing was almost immediately adjourned until May in Nairobi Wednesday into a lawsuit over the 2012 death of a Kenyan mother who was last seen alive with a British soldier. The body of Agnes Wanjiru, 21, was found in a septic tank after she reportedly went out partying with British soldiers in the central town of Nanyuki, where the British Army has a permanent garrison. And the COP28 Climate Summit is underway in Dubai, and the Director General of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says climate change is the biggest threat to human health in Africa and the rest of the world. Jean Kaseya says that mitigating that risk is at the top of his agenda. Former U.S. First Lady Rosalynn Carter, who passed away November 19th, was laid to rest Wednesday following 3 days of tributes and memorial services. VOA's Ken Faribault has more.
With only close friends and family invited to attend funeral services at Maranatha Baptist Church, well-wishers from around the country lined the streets of Plains, Georgia, to honor former First Lady Rosalynn Carter.
I just wanted to make sure I was here to pay my respects to Rosalynn after all she has done for this country and for the world.
Suzanne Taylor traveled more than 1,100 kilometers from Buffalo, New York, to attend the Atlanta tribute services earlier in the week. And now, Mrs. Carter's final journey through Plains.
Having been in Plains on many visits, it was very heartbreaking for me to see everybody walking Rosalynn and Jimmy down the road, knowing it was Rosalynn's last trip home.
In a moment that paid tribute to the Carters' historic walk down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. during the inauguration parade in January 1977, the family escorted former President Jimmy Carter's vehicle on foot, walking behind Mrs. Carter's hearse.
It was such a joy to see the family walk behind her.
13-year-old Reed Elliott arrived from Kentucky to say goodbye to the former First Lady, who he met and spent time with 5 years ago. He says Plains has lost a woman who, to the people who live here, was more than a global humanitarian.
They've lost an icon, and they've lost a neighbor.
Plains has lost an icon today. It's really a sad day. But on the other hand, Rosalynn will always be alive in Plains. Her kindness and goodness will last forever. Love lasts forever.
Philip Curlin runs the Plains Trading Post and says he'll miss his frequent visits with Mrs. Carter in his store.
I feel like she's passed the torch now, and we all are going to have to be kinder, better people and start doing good deeds.
Rosalynn Carter's final resting place will be next to the pond in front of her home, at the edge of the town where she was born nearly a century ago. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Plains, Georgia.
The United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP28, is underway in Dubai Thursday. As Henry Ridgwell reports, the meeting comes at what scientists say is a crucial moment in the fight against global warming, with warnings the world is on the brink of irreversible and catastrophic climate change.
Scientists expect 2023 to go down as the hottest year on record. Fearsome heat forest fires and flash storms have characterized a year of extreme weather around the world. Against that urgent backdrop, 70,000 delegates from 197 nations gather in Dubai for the two-week COP28 climate summit beginning Thursday. Observers call it a crucial moment.
This is the launch of what's called the global stocktake. So this is the first time since the Paris Agreement the world has taken stock of how are we doing on the objectives we set ourselves back then. And it's challenging to see what that report says. We should be reducing our emissions by 43% by the end of this decade. The latest trajectory suggests they're actually going to rise by 9%, with catastrophic impacts for people all over the world.
The COP summits involve complex negotiations. Most countries want to reduce global emissions. Less developed nations say richer nations are responsible for most historic greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore they should compensate poorer nations for reducing their use of fossil fuels. Poorer nations also need help to adapt to the changing climate.
Last year, the big outcome was a commitment to create a fund for loss and damage for those impacts that we can't avoid. What we need to see this year is that that fund takes another step towards becoming reality.
The Paris Agreement aims to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2050. Visiting Antarctica this month, where the ice is now melting 3 times faster than in the 1990s, the United Nations Secretary General said the culprit was clear.
It is absolutely crucial to end the addiction to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the first source of climate change, and I hope that the next COP will be able to decide the phase out of fossil fuels with a clear time frame that is compatible to guarantee that the temperature will not rise more than 1.5 degrees.
The leaders of the world's 2 biggest economies, US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, agreed to deepen cooperation on climate change during talks in November.
What you see is that if the US and China are in lockstep and have a clear sense of what they want to achieve together, it's much easier for the world to come together around those commitments.
However, a US official said this week that President Biden would not be attending the COP28 talks. No reason was given. US climate envoy John Kerry will be leading day-to-day negotiations for the United States. Henry Ridgwell, VOA News, London.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.